Hello and welcome to Koller Commentary. Today, I invite my husband, Matt Koller, onto the pod to reflect on our past 4 years of marriage together as our anniversary arrives at the end of April. It's crazy because I still remember our wedding night and how amazing it was for both of us to be under the same roof as so many of our loved ones with God smiling above. Even though there was so much joy that night, and there has been in our lives with blessings upon blessings, marriage has been far from easy for both of us, and we have gone through fires in our personal walks and in our united journey, especially this past year, which was absolutely our hardest year. It's kind of crazy to think that we can come together on the pod with genuine hearts of joy and excitement to share how we are more in love today than that day 4 years ago, because if you asked us even 6 months ago, either of us could be quick to describe our marriage as lonely, disconnected, and hopeless. Ooh, okay, that feels heavy, but without further ado, welcome Matt!
Hello, I'm happy to be here as the other half of the Kollers in Koller Commentary. I'm excited to be back. It's been a little while.
Yes. Last time I think you were on, I was sick, and I'm sick again.
Oh, well, hopefully I can cheer you up with this great talk we're about to have together.
Can you just sense the joy in our voices? So both of us would agree that 2021 was so far, and hopefully, the worst year of our marriage, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think you always want to get better and better.
Yeah, and hopefully it will be the worst year of our marriage, but if there are harder, worst years to come, hopefully we'll at least be more equipped to approach it together. So Matt, why was 2021 the hardest year for you?
Well, I mean, it was a year of, I think, a lot of still newness. I mean, just from like a practical standpoint, right? We had Jaden kind of entering his more kind of like formative learning years, at least compared to what he was. Like, he could do so much. He requires so much time and energy and like thoughtfulness into how we raise him. And my last year of residency, so there's like the pressure of kind of what's next and figuring out kind of from a career standpoint what's going on. But I mean, right, I think for me especially, I think like marriage is like the 80% of what's on my mind every day. So kind of despite everything, I think the success of my year is defined by the success of our marriage. And it was probably the most challenging year. I mean, I think back on the year before when Jaden was just born, which was very hard, but that was more hard in the sense, I think, of just like exhausting. I think this year was hard in kind of like you alluded to before, in like, oh man, like, is our marriage always going to be this difficult? I think what made it hard is I'm a very optimistic person. So I always kind of like anticipate, well, like, you know, this might be bad now, but I could see this happening to change it. Or I could see this happening where it opens this door. And I think this past year, I was like running out of this could happen. And then for really the first time, I think, I mean, our marriage, but actually like in my life, I was struggling to see like the open door that could make things look different. And that persisted for most of the year, which I don't think I've ever been would characterize myself as kind of a person who feels like hopelessness. Probably the first time in my life I felt that, because again, marriage is kind of the defining thing for me, right? It's my most important relationship. And it was just in a tough place where, it didn't seem like what we were struggling with was changing. So even if we were struggling with the same things, it weighed more and more heavily because I couldn't see like the other side of it. So I think that was kind of the biggest thing for me for a lot of the year.
What were some specifics within our marriage that you would maybe want to share that made it so hopeless for you?
I think just how quickly we became disconnected. Because part of it's a personality thing, right? I think when we disagree with something, we respond a little differently. But I think regardless of that, it got to the point where whether it was something big or something small, it always turned into us completely disconnecting from each other. And it would take longer and longer for us to reconnect, I think. And there were periods of reconnection, but it seems like those were kind of the exception rather than the norm. The norm was something would happen and it would kind of linger, and then we would fix it temporarily, but then the next thing would happen. And the next things would often be like, honestly, like kind of sometimes significant, but sometimes things that I couldn't comprehend how it was that it was disconnecting us the way it was. And I think it became less about like what was happening to us and more about the response we had. And I think we got in a pattern of separating emotionally and intimately. And that snowballs a lot of things. And yeah, it's just really hard for me when like the person I love the most and who my life is kind of defined by the most, I feel like is just so separated from me. And I never had that sense, at least not to that degree, even in our really hard stages before, right? This was kind of different. Yeah, I think that kind of lacks details, but in a broad sense, that was the big thing. How about you?
Kind of just like, why was this the hardest year of marriage for both of us in our own ways? And I think kind of how you alluded to this being more of Jaden's formative years, where it wasn't just about losing sleep, because I also remember Jaden was born when COVID started, pretty much, for at least Texas. Leaving that hospital, not being in the same world than when we entered that hospital, was extremely scary for me. But I remember feeling so close to you, because in that time of like incredible uncertainty and anxiety, you were very steadfast, and I felt more united with you to tackle this parenthood together. Fast forward to 2021 though, that's when he's developing, and there's more things of like teaching and responsibilities with him, not just let's give him a boob and then let's catch sleep when we can. And I think for me personally, that mental load of motherhood, and I think that's something no mother really can prepare for, but that mental load of motherhood, including with COVID happening, so having to make the choice of sacrificing my work, which was finally the work job I wanted in Houston, it really was something that was like difficult for me to do, but I felt like unseen in that quote quote sacrifice. And I think that played out not just in our marriage, but something I felt in general was like, oh, if you're a stay-at-home mom, that's like the dream, right? And I agree, there are so many blessings to be able to watch your child grow up, but I think because it was giving up a job that I was really excited about, I think that was really hard for me to feel this like, oh, but there's also this big deal about like losing a sense of self when you become a mother, because you're constantly thinking of all these things for Jaden. And that doesn't take away from the ways you cared for Jaden and thought about him in ways. But I think I felt like you didn't recognize or realize the mental load that I had been carrying. And I know that I expressed that to you a lot. And even though I expressed it a lot, there was never a resolution in that, or like a united approach in how to resolve that. And so I think that created disconnection. Another point of disconnection I felt was kind of resentment because of our communication styles being different. And while there were things that were difficult when it's just you and me, when there's a child involved as well, and that once again being in COVID, meaning like the grandparents are involved as well, that was difficult for me to understand certain communication methods. And then I think in general for both of us, what I had noticed was, and maybe it's because I pushed that with my culture in ways of like this theme of sacrifice. I think both of us wanted to highlight the sacrifice we were putting into our marriage and to our family with Jaden. And because of that, we couldn't see each other's sacrifice, or we couldn't even encourage each other's. You did a much better job of encouraging that than I did, but we wanted to be seen for what we were doing for our family, and both of us felt like we weren't being seen for that. So me feeling that way for me personally was this huge thing. And even as I share that right now, I think about Pastor Jason Koh, who like did our wedding ceremony, talking about that me becoming we and then becoming he in our marriage. And I thought we had kind of like tackled the we, but I was like, wow, like we're still so much on that me of like, I'm doing this and I'm doing that, that the we wasn't there yet, if that makes sense. So then with these things that made it difficult for us separately and together, how did it affect you personally?
Yeah, I think pretty dramatically, actually. I think my mind for the first time ever shifted from, oh, well, what can I do to make our marriage better, to, well, our marriage is not going to get better, so what can I do to feel better elsewhere, right? Because I became fairly convinced I wasn't going to get it from you. So, well, she's going to be like this mean and disconnected and just like despair so easily, then we don't really have a shot there, but I can still be like a provider. I can still be a good husband, you know, in a practical sense, and I can like kind of fill the gaps elsewhere, which is like obviously not a lasting solution, but it just got me into some really bad habits. So, I mean, I would even call them like idols, honestly, into chasing, you know. And at the same time, there's a crazy world around us where like stocks were booming and a lot of work from home stuff, so just kind of a lot of extra time on our hands, and it just led me to kind of chasing kind of worldly kind of feelings and gains and stuff like that, because I was like, well, that can ease other parts of my life, right? If I do this. And stuff I've never really chased before, or maybe stuff I have but not in a long time, kind of that I thought was in the past. So it really brought out this like non-eternal focus of mine, non-marital but also non-eternal focus. So that was by far the biggest effect. I think I really lost sight of what is most important to me, and I started chasing really temporary things to fill like the hole that I was like, oh well, definitely doesn't seem like I'm getting that from Unji. So,
and I wasn't the partner you needed to even be able to feel safe to come to me to like just work through things at that time.
Yeah, because you know, in this you don't really realize it, but you probably, you know, I never would have said I like didn't trust you, but you know, I probably lost trust in my ability to like communicate with you and talk to you. Stuff that kind of happens like insidiously, like under the covers, that just builds up. Because this was probably like almost like a full year, like slow process, like build towards kind of the end of the year. So yeah, that was kind of the biggest, I think, change in me. I actually don't think I became meaner or like harsher, but that was my version of disconnecting. Like I think
you were more like robotic with, because you're saying you had the mindset of provider. And you did that. But you were like autopilot or something.
Yeah, like I think your version of disconnecting is like a very clear emotional disconnection, and mine was like kind of becoming like a robot husband while seeking my own kind of entertainment and fulfillment apart from you.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense.
Oh yeah. And how about you?
As I signal Matt to ask me. I think for me, you know, and this was probably forming before this year, but this year I really had to face and accept that I had been struggling with some mental health things in my life, whether it have been from our relationship previously, but also just like different things that I had held internal. And so with motherhood alone, right? Motherhood and COVID alone being such a big stress factor, but then in that isolating feeling, both of us couldn't go to our partners in our struggles. I felt very misunderstood or like not understood for my emotional bursts out. And while I don't want to use mental health as like an excuse, I was like depressed, and I did have a lot of anxiety that I was not used to, because I was a very strong woman, and just dealing with these types of thoughts and feelings was really difficult for me. But also because you, Matt, are a very like you said, an optimistic person, even-keeled, well-balanced person, I think, and that has been very good for times of despair. It's also difficult to feel understood when I do have hard emotions that I've never dealt with before, and not feeling safe to express that with you, or not feeling sure as to why I'm experiencing these things, but knowing that this is causing our marriage to suffer more because clearly I'm unhealthy. I don't know if that makes sense to our listeners, but I had very strong beliefs that basically over time, and I think even like watching you being such a loving dad, right, was so beautiful to witness, because I think anyone would say that you probably brag about Jaden more than I do, right? I think at times though, it was actually hard for me to witness in our personal lives, because you thought about Jaden very intentionally in the ways of like, I don't want this to happen to him, or like even like actions of like sleep care and how you want to approach that, or certain things. And while I appreciated that, I was also like, oh, I feel like I don't receive that type of intentionality for me. And so I continued to just have these beliefs of like, I must not be worthy to be pursued. I must not be worthy to be loved. And this is not something because of you, right? But those were beliefs that I was creating inside of me that continued to make me close off even more. So like when I had an outburst and your first response would be like, well, how did it get like this? I also didn't know how it got like this because I've not experienced those harsh emotions. But in that space, that made me disconnect more because I felt not seen or understood at that time, which is not your fault, right? Because both of us were kind of navigating these new waters together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you hear, right, like one person after another talk about it, like it's so easy to see how it snowballs so quickly because like these things obviously like interplay with each other very poorly,
right?
Like they reinforce each other. But in the moment, right, it's just kind of you experiencing it on your own. And it's really hard to understand like why it keeps getting worse when like you're trying so hard to make it better.
Right.
Yeah. It's dangerous.
Yeah. And I think something else, like these are all things like I think mental health and like in general for me realizing some things like I have some harsh feelings towards like white culture in certain ways and how it had affected me since growing up. And so I think there are like certain things inside of me that felt like, oh, because we never actually like clicked in our Koreanness together, which is something I think I was excited about. There were times I had resentment and feeling like, and this is like not your fault, right? Like, but being a white passing male, right? I did feel these like subconscious feelings of anger towards you in the ways that I feel like I gave up parts of my culture that was really important to me, which is different from parts of the culture that is really important to you while we both share a Korean identity, right? And so I kind of like had those feelings and I feel like that's something I have to learn how to separate and not let that become something that affects our marriage. And that's something I had to continue to process in therapy as well. So I think, unfortunately, I became very unhealthy in certain ways. And unfortunately, you were my partner at this time. And sickness and in health is not just physically, but mentally as well. Yeah, that was like a big part for me and how things affected me.
It's ironic that I'm a psychiatrist.
Yeah, I think, and I mean like TBH in our arguments, I would be like, you're a psychiatrist. Like it was very ironic in a lot of ways because I didn't feel understood. But yeah, there was a lot of things I was doing in my actions that didn't let you feel encouraged and uplifted and motivated anymore because I was very mean. And I'm probably still like, I am a little mean, but it's not, it was the heart behind it. I think both of us could attest to not like, I don't know, like what were we the right fit for each other? Like, was this the right choice? But also not believing in things like separation for us. And not that it got to that point, but those were thoughts that we flirted with, in our own times because I think it became so hopeless for us.
And honestly, probably like every married couple has points where you see traits about your person and like other people don't have those really difficult traits. Like life could have been much easier. Like that sort of mindset can trickle in.
Yeah. I think that was hard for me because, and I think this is why marriage is so difficult because you're always, if you're a decently like good person or you're, I was always like affirmed as a person. So I think like hearing how I am this difficult and experiencing a lot of things for the first time myself and knowing these are difficult things, but I didn't go through them before. I don't know. It's interesting. We have more reflections on that later.
I guess this will probably come later too, but it's also interesting just where your mind goes. Like I think the same truth can be seen very differently, whether times are good or bad. So like Eunji as a person is this like person who has all these characteristics. And I think like in that year when I saw her, like the parts of it that like I did not want to be married to were like the glowing parts that were so easy to see. Yeah. But at the same time, right, those other parts of her exist. And, I will talk later about just when I became in a healthier mindset. It's so interesting. Like, I'm not any less aware that those hard parts are there, but like I see her so differently because I'm healthy. Mm-hmm. And it's just like pretty crazy the shift that can make.
I mean, I think we could talk for hours just on how much of a struggle we went through. And I don't think it's unique to just us. I do think a lot of couples do struggle, whether it be when they become parents or whatever year it is in their own marriage, and that like transformation time and that choice to realize we can transform and be the better us, or mentally give up like we kind of were both deciding to do. But if we look at the bigger picture, and for us, right, God is a big part, a huge part of our lives, but we made him absent in many ways in that past year. How do you think he was actually much at work, still working in us?
Yeah, I've always seen God as like someone who doesn't like keep us from bad things, but when we choose to indulge in like sinful things or bad things or act in like a bad way, he figures out like a way to use that for our good.
Right.
So I think that's how I could best explain it. Kind of how I saw God moving in this last year. I think because of like circumstances, I not only I think, you know, as a husband, I began lacking and kind of entering this kind of robotic mode, but as a person, you know, as I kind of alluded to before, started redeveloping some kind of bad parts of my life. So I think God used that to like show me how quickly, like how, you know, within 1 year span, like how quickly I can have all these like crappy parts of me that come back, like flood back so easily without me even realizing it. Like I start chasing after these things. And then, so he let me like see all that and experience it. And then he really decided to just meet me very intimately towards the end of the year in December. It's funny. My testimony is very boring. It's like the opposite of NG's. That's why I don't like giving it, because I had a very like typical, right? There's never any like crazy event. I just kind of like, I'm not gonna give my testimony. Anyways, very boring.
I don't think so, but okay.
Well, yeah. But regardless, I never had this definable like God experience as part of my testimony. So really, for the first time, I've had pretty like singular God moments, but not like changes where he like changes me. He really met with me. I remember the details very vividly, but it was a morning where I wasn't going in, and I went to drop Jaden off at daycare, and I had a morning at the coffee shop, and then he just kind of like stopped me in the car, and I just heard him like communicating to me, just like basically like it's time to like do this differently. Like this, it was like in an hour, and in the hour I wrote Unji like this long email, kind of like confessing a lot of these things that I knew I was doing wrong, and kind of this idea of like, regardless of her, I have been very bad, like as me, as a husband, all these things. Just wrote her a lot of things that I hadn't really communicated to her at all, because it's kind of all the things that I got caught up in. At the same time, he like completely reframed how I saw her. I think the best way I can describe it is like, I realized that if I want to like live for God again, then like, what's the best way I can show God that I'm doing that? It's to like be better in the one realm that he's called me to above all else, and that's as a husband. So it like shifted this idea of like, well, it's not even about being better to Unji or like being better. Like it's about being faithful to like where God has put me in my life, and that's as a husband before anything else. So like it's time. Like I can't keep using Unji's actions, and I'm not trying to like pile on Unji. Like right, we both had our own struggles, but like me blaming her for the way I'm acting, like that's not even a thing. Like that's a thing that is on me, not on her. Right. And I think it shows a faithlessness towards God when I justify these things by that. So it was just this, he met me in like an hour, kind of broke me down, had me confess a bunch of things that I hadn't all year, and just like in a moment shifted the way I see Unji. And honestly, it's kind of crazy. So since that day, that definable day, I have not once partaken in any of the things that I like let go of all those desires. And at the same time, even at our worst over these last 4 months, I see Unji with so much love and like a desire for her, because I see her as this extension of me that is like sharpening me and making me better. And I see her as, more importantly than anything, I see her as the woman I want to be married to every day, even like an hour after our biggest fights since then. Right.
Or I'm not
perfect.
Minutes.
So like,
sometimes
like
it'll
30
be
seconds in, it's tough sometimes.
He's
but like
very good at bringing it back.
Yeah, but I can see her with eyes of like truly know, like, oh, regardless of, I still can't believe this happened, she's still the person that's like best for me, because of all these other things. So yeah, I had this like singular moment of change, which is weird. That's not me. I'm not like a very charismatic kind of, I've never been that. So I've never like experienced God in that way, like quite like that. So it's pretty crazy. I think he did something different to me in this instance. How about you? Sorry.
Do you remember
Sometimes
the question?
I get caught up talking about this, and then after I'm done talking, for a second I'm like reflecting, like, oh, like I wonder if I said that well.
You
and then
did.
I forget to,
I think you delivered
and then I
it
forget
great.
to ask you the same question. So how do you feel like God protected and guided you through this last year despite all this?
So Matt's encounter that he's talking about happened in December, so at the end of 2021. When I think about that year, though, I do see how he was present and he was guiding us with steps in between. For example, we actually tried to do therapy together through Baylor, and that was just terrible in my opinion. No offense to the person who was on the other end of the Zoom call, but it just, there was a lot of cultural components I didn't feel heard about. And it was also really hard to hear each other talk in front of each other when we were not in a healthy space. Something that Joanne, one of our good friends, wanted to spearhead was a marriage book club over the summer. And so it was kind of like a therapy in its own way, where it was a safe space to share things. And so we did this marriage book club where we read a book by Aaron Ivey and Jamie Ivey, who wrote their separate stories within. And then we would come together and discuss. And even that was so hard for us. We would, an hour or two before, we would talk to each other about the questions that we were going to go over. And multiple times those led to fights as well, right? It was so difficult because I think even at that time, both of us, and maybe probably more me, just like wanted to be heard for my struggle or my hurt in this marriage. And so, yeah, that was really difficult. But I think when I look back at it, that was necessary, right? To peel back some things and hearing the hurts we felt from each other in a place where we felt safe to share it. And so I'm really grateful for that group, because even just having a space to talk about these issues and knowing there might not have been a resolution, and even crying or being angry moments before or moments after that book club, to be able to have that space was so much of a blessing, and something I've personally always wanted, like a group in a sense like that to share. And so thinking of how God somehow allowed me to do that with Matt's friend group, which has its own layers of awkwardness from my past, but in general, being able to do this was a huge blessing. And I think a starter for that. And then that same summer, I started my personal therapy because we both talked about it. And even though we believe we needed marriage counseling and both of us could benefit from therapy, rather than me just waiting for Matt to also do it or something, I really needed to do it myself. And so even thinking of how I was introduced to Mustard Seed Generation, who is the executive director, will be on the podcast next month. Woot woot. But I think through that and just my heart for mental health growing in that capacity, but then being able to be connected to a culturally competent therapist, in my opinion, and just someone who knew me and could understand some of the things I was going through, whether it happened in my marriage, but also just things that come up through being a child of a Korean immigrant, you know. And so I was able to process so much through her. And recently we listened to a sermon where there was like a saying like, your marriage is only as healthy as the unhealthiest person in the marriage. And a big, stubborn, prideful part of me wanted to be like, we're both unhealthy. But unfortunately right now, like I am the more unhealthy person, and constantly working towards making myself better is so important for the actual wholeness of our marriage, which I think has been a huge factor in certain things. Even though it wasn't like a wow changer, it's been a process that has contributed to me realizing things and then being able to break those false beliefs and whatnot. So that was really good. In October, we went to this marriage conference that was suggested to us by another friend, Kat. And I think that was really helpful just for like practical tips. And even that conference, I had been searching for conferences or marriage things that can help us quote, quote, fix it, you know, online, because I just was like, we can't just be giving up because we're not working. Like we haven't even sought help or something. And so even for Kat to have suggested that one, which was the perfect conference, actually was an answered prayer that I am so grateful for, because for me, I need these resources and these practices. And we got some really good communication practices from that helped us in the initial months. And that for me then led up to still feeling like things weren't working, and personally also being rebuked, like, are you even praying for Matt, or is it just like this, like, we have to fix it mode? And then to see that email in December and realize, like, man, this is really all in God's hand and in his timing and how he encounters both of us. And a huge prayer was just that, like, Matt would also have his own revelation, because a lot of times I felt like I was pushing us to this some sort of goal that maybe wasn't a healthy way of doing it, but it felt like I only cared in terms of action to get there. But to see that, oh wow, it actually wasn't anything I really did or pushed us to, but God meeting Matt in the car at a coffee shop. And so I think that's a really humbling and amazing moment. So I think those were the main big things I saw, that like God's fingerprints were clearly in that year, even though it was our most like lonely and difficult year. So then 2021 was terrible. It ended up being pretty great at the end, like the last month, I guess.
Yeah, December was good.
Yeah. And even just like getting to do Christmas with my family. And I think we even got even deeper talks of what all those struggles meant for us.
Yeah.
But how do we know it's quote, quote, changed? What are some signs? You know, we've been encouraged before only to be discouraged or disappointed in the past. How do we know we're actually on the right direction, in the right direction?
I mean, I think I talked about some of it before, but I guess in two parts, like, so individually, how do I know it's changed is that I've like remained protected from a lot of the stuff that was creeping in last year. Fully protected. So, and that, if anything, even more than just the fact that I haven't kind of like gotten into some of those things, it's given me like a confidence that like, wow, like it was really like a God thing, like a snap of the finger thing. And I think it kind of like renewed my, not faith, but like renewed my bond with God, I guess. Although I gotta be careful with it, because I think because of that, I've like trusted that change so much that I've been praying some and haven't been reading too much, but like the basics, I need to kind of like make sure those are still there. But anyways, but it has renewed kind of my bond with God and my trust in him. I've always been a very trusting person in God. I haven't always been like emotionally connected to him, but ever since I was kind of, I guess, saved or really established my connection with God, I always like trusted in his kind of provision and providence. And I kind of have that fully back again. I mean, as for our marriage, like, how do I know? I think it's just our ability to overcome all levels of conflict. So by that, I mean, when we have mild conflict, it doesn't escalate and it stays mild and we can kind of move on. When we have like moderate conflict, it can escalate a little bit, but that doesn't last that long and it doesn't like carry over to the next day or hours later like it used to. And we have like, when we have really bad conflict, which does still happen, less frequently, when that happens, we are able to like come together before that conflict is resolved in a way we never did over the last year. So like there are times when there's been a few like really bad episodes, right? We're not like perfect and over these last few months, still plenty of stuff. But in our worst, like a few come to mind, like the really awful ones where I know for a fact, like 6 months ago, that would have led to like zero communication the rest of the night and waking up the next day like kind of in despair. It like an hour later, there's like a push to kind of like slowly reconnect, and we have a conversation where we remind each other like that despite this, like I still want you, I still love you, like I don't see you differently, I just acknowledge that we maybe saw this incident differently, but I don't see you differently. I think I've reassured you with that like a handful of times.
Like even once we left Christmas break, I went into like a little bit of depressed feelings, because when I do leave people that know me so well without having to explain myself or something, it really fills something in my heart that like feeds me so well. And so when I do leave people, whether it's been when like I traveled and I come home and I'm like, oh, I'm sad, I miss those girlfriends I just visited, or mainly my family, I get really sad. And I had that again after we left vacation, right? I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is when it's going to go back to normal, because I'm having a breakdown that I can't even understand right now. And Matt's going to be like, oh, she didn't change. And so I'm not going to change. Right. And we still had to go to HEB to buy groceries for Jaden since we just got back from vacation. And in the car, when I was still in that moment, and in those moments, I never felt you were okay with it. I didn't think you like hated me for it, but I felt like it was like, this is bad and he doesn't like this. But in that moment, you had just said something along the lines of like, Unji, I still really love you right now. And I still want to move forward with you right now. And this doesn't change anything right now. And I think like hearing that, like, just made me break down, because I think that's like what I crave to hear. Even if you felt like that in depths of your heart, I didn't know that, right? And so those responses were just so vital. And so there's little things like that HEB moment, or even like bigger things where it escalated, because I personally am still having to dismantle beliefs in my mind, but your response would be that same. It might not be within that 5 minutes in the car, right? You need time to also respond, but it would always be like that. Or one time something happened, I went to the car because I felt really frustrated, and you came to find me in the car, And there were times where like there was something that happened and I went outside and I was like praying you would come outside and find me, but you didn't. And then I would feel alone or something, right? And so I think the fact that you do that extra step is like, it means the world to me, and also reminds me like I don't have to go hide when I'm feeling like this, but like I have a partner that's willing to walk with me through this. And whether that had always been your heart, like knowing it now has been like a game changer for me to try to like be more upfront about like things I know that are still unhealthy in my heart.
Yeah, actually, so I remember those as senior, but actually the one that sticks in my mind was there's one, we were upstairs.
I know what you're talking about.
You were breaking down.
No, I know, but
do you remember why?
Yeah, I know why, but we were like, that's the night baby number 2 was consummated, which is why I didn't want to bring it up.
I wasn't going to say that.
Well, I think we were only able to do that because you helped bring it back together. But I was really I went through a really bad breakdown then, and it wasn't because of you. And I think it wasn't like because of, well, in the moment, like we had an argument, but the breakdown part was like, so
that one stands out the most because
I don't want to bring it up.
I could not understand why you're breaking down. I remember the main topic. I don't think this was like the foundational reason why you broke down, but the conversation, I don't even know if you remember the conversation topic
everything.
we were having.
I know.
We're talking about finances.
I know.
Yeah. And you just started.
But that's not the only thing.
Yeah. But
there were also other things that I'm not going to say on here because.
Yeah. But I just remember, so it was in general a topic that just me thinking about it, I was like, this is not a reason for this. And it was bad. And it was really, really rough. And then I remember I left for a little because I like couldn't do anything. Like it was bad. And then I came back. I talked to you, and when I was talking to you, I was not trying to say words to like fix it. I was saying what I felt. And then I remember I told you, I was like, I think I said basically something to the effect like, Unji, like I'm not gonna leave you like this. Like I refuse to be someone who like has my wife in this state and like not be there for
because
her.
I was going through go away.
So because you kept telling me to go away. Like there's nothing I could have done to stay. But then I came back, I was like, you know what, you can tell me to go away, but like I'm not going to leave you like this. And the reason why I'm not is because like I don't understand what's happening to you right now, but I don't see you differently and I don't love you differently. And to me that like encapsulates really well the shift in my mindset like towards you. Because I didn't know what the heck was happening. But
and then we continued with our ovulation process. Right. PG-13 episode right here. But yeah, that was the other one I was also thinking of as well. Yeah, I think it's obviously not like it's changed. I think something we've talked about recently is that I feel very heard by you, which is something I didn't feel before, right? But we're still working on being like naturally seen by each other, where it's not like I need this from you, because when I communicate things to you, you do it really well. But there's a part of me, right, that wants to have you just think about me and do something without me having to like always delegate it. And I think that has to go back to like that mental load stuff. But I think both of us are working on that. And that's why, sometimes when you have breakthrough, which was Matt's encounter that really kind of catalyzed things for us, you think, okay, now we're ready for growth, right? But we're still in that healing stage where we need to heal of a lot of things. And something I had realized and was frustrated in was that Matt and I were really good and like showing signs of great healing and growth and love. But I had even more depressed feelings and more negative thoughts that had nothing to do with Matt, just like my mind. And it was so difficult for me personally and discouraging because I almost mentally blamed our marriage on why my mental was becoming like this. And so I think in general, having to, when we say a year of healing, it's not just in our marriage, but it could have started there, but there are beliefs that continue to grow and fester around me. And so having to process those things has been vital in this past few months, which I think we've been doing an active job of like talking to each other about that and figuring out how to do that. So then what are some things that has worked for us? Like practically, we have one practical way to let you guys take away, which was at the marriage conference in October. Because right, like I would say I'm the one that has initiated more of the communication before, not now, but like before it was definitely more me. However, I didn't always create an emotionally safe space to do so. And that led to a lot of fight, right? But I think what these styles did for us was allow us to create a safe space, which could be corny sometimes, but allowed us to really get to the root of things. And there were multiple like communication styles that were in this conference, but the one that really worked for us and didn't feel as scripted was the fear cycle. And what that basically is a way to pinpoint like you yourself and then also your spouse, your fear buttons, and then in turn your fear reactions. So then you're starting to discover what is actually the thing you're really scared about. What's that core fear that's speaking to you that's making you react this way? And so there was a bunch of different words that were given to us. For example, as a result of this conflict, I felt rejected, abandoned, disconnected, like a failure, helpless or powerless. And the list goes on. And then it's because of that feeling, right? Now I am going to do this, which is withdrawal or escalate, earn it mode, blaming, exaggeration. So you're able to name what your fear button was. And because of that, what was your action? And I'm going to share an Insta post about this as a practical tip. But something we were able to do was, I guess, kind of like identify for me, I felt disconnected. Like the big ones for me were feeling disconnected, feeling helpless, and feeling invalidated. And so even if, like, for example, sometimes I would get so frustrated because I have never had so many communication mishaps in my life than with this person in front of me. For example, like I know I said, put the apple in the fridge, right? But Matt knows he heard put the apple next to the fridge, right? Something like that. But that would make me feel so confused. I was like, how could I never have these types of miscommunication with other people, but Matt and I constantly have those like, no, you said this. And then we're like, don't tell me what I said. Don't tell me what I heard. Like a lot of those, right? That's like a simple thing that was a random conflict. But what was actually happening was like, I felt one, incredibly disconnected, that I don't know why I am constantly having these communication problems with my most intimate partner. And then that also made me feel very helpless because what can I do? Like, I can't change someone's mind, but I know this happened, blah, blah, blah. And so then my main reaction was often withdrawal, which is something that, Matt had kind of mentioned before, never feeling so like apart from someone because I tended to withdraw, but I also was very good at criticizing. And I think I also showed a lot of like anger, rage that I probably wasn't used to myself, which was more of like along the lines of emotions I was dealing with. But those are big ones for me. But let's say because I was withdrawing, I made Matt's fear button be unleashed, which would be...
So the idea is this is, right, like a cycle that builds on each other. So she said...
I might feel disconnected.
And then you withdraw. So because she withdraws, one of my core is like I feel unloved because now like we're separated and I don't even know why. Like in my mind, nothing really happened. So when I feel unloved, maybe
Your main ones were like defensiveness, fix it mode and something else.
Yeah. So yeah, I could get defensive. Like, she's treating me harshly. I didn't even do anything wrong. Like, I just heard what I heard or whatever. So I get defensive maybe, and I like combat the situation. So when I do that,
then I feel
the cycle
invalidated.
restarts. Yeah.
My other fear button of feeling invalidated happens. And so then, because maybe first it's like my reaction is to criticize or complain. But then after he does his reaction, then I feel invalidated and once again, helpless. What's the point? And then I withdraw. And then when I withdraw, we just like don't talk to each other, or he feels something.
And then maybe now I'm the one who feels disconnected. So when I feel disconnected, I don't know. Then
sometimes you would try to go into fix it mode.
Yeah, either that,
and then
or
you would
withdraw.
be like, let's talk. Yeah, one or the other.
Yeah.
So when you said like, let's talk, like I don't want to talk, but then you would pester me, so then I would get anger, rage, and then it's like a big cycle, which is kind of what you mentioned earlier when we had kind of shared some reflections at the beginning of the episode. Basically, we were able to start realizing, oh, here's a cycle. Here are some things we feel, which is both of us felt a lot of disconnection, but Matt felt a lot of unloved and definitely didn't feel worthy a lot. Like definitely felt like I was always complaining about something. And so that wasn't helpful, right? And then vice versa. And so I think being able to name those things in a way that allows us not to say you did this, but rather I'm feeling this was really helpful for us. And even though we don't use the practice like specifically anymore, I think this is something we still think about a lot. When now, right, like even if Matt's fear button might be hit, if you hear how we feel like it's changed, he comes and he just talks to me. And that's been really helpful. This clearly reflects that it's often my fear button that is, it's hit enough for me to create a fear reaction. So I know I should also work on those reactions more. But when I do have those reactions, because of what Matt went through, he's able to react against what would be a cycle.
Yeah, and a big concept of this is, right, so the cycle is basically a core fear, a core reaction, and the other person's core fear and core reaction. And it takes one person. You can't really change the core fear. That's much harder. But all it takes to break the cycle is for one person to change their core reaction to a healthy reaction. And as soon as one person can do that, you break the cycle. So that's the idea. And I think I've gotten good at changing that core reaction. I think I probably do that more often than you right now.
Yeah, I
but
agree.
you do it sometimes. And I think
I agree.
I think that's the idea, right? Like we as, we as humans, we as Christ followers, we as like adults who are, charged with an ability to like love our spouses, right? We every time this cycle starts, like we have an opportunity to love by breaking the cycle. And it can be really hard, but it can be pretty dramatic. It just takes like a little bit of reflection and like effort to be like, okay, no, every part of me instinctively wants to react this way, but I have a choice to react a different way. And I think that's kind of the idea of this cycle, is like you break it at those points of choosing, which is those reaction points.
Wow, Dr. Koller's coming in with the better explanation.
Thank you.
Something else that was helpful for us, and not like as crazy, but just working more to understand each other. We did this value sheet that my therapist had given to me, and you just kind of rank values, but you also rate the success of those values. And so we each did that separately, and we came together, and our number one value that was ranked 10, the only 10 for both of us, was faith. And then following that was marriage and parenting, and then some more after, but those were the top 3 for us. And luckily when we did this value sheet, marriage was being worked on. And so the rate of success to the deficit of how it's ranked was not that low, if that makes sense. But faith was ranked number 10, or at the highest level, a value rating of 10. But I think I rated the success at like a 2, and maybe you did like a 4 because you're a little more optimistic than I am. But that means that's like a -8 and a -6 deficit for both of us, and how we're prioritizing our number one value, right? And how that's working. And so I think that was important to just like acknowledge. And so we can, even as like strategies, right? And action steps in how to better ourselves. It's not just like working on our personal marriage, but also like what are other things that help us and uplift us. And for us, faith being one of them doesn't just mean like how we read the Bible and how we pray, but also like church, community, what other ways that God speaks to us, and are we doing those things? Like for Matt, a lot of it sometimes is like nature and travel, right? And so just like thinking of those things were helpful to be aware of so that we can make sure we're feeding and investing into our top priorities. Something I also took away from that was one of Matt's lower values, actually rated one of the lower ones, was the career, right? The career value.
Yeah, that was pretty low on my list.
Yeah, and for me, that was actually one of my higher ones. It just wasn't in the top 3. And I think that was important too, because that ends up being a big clashing factor for us, because I personally feel like, in our marriage, we had to take the choice and invest in Matt's career because it's a medical training journey. And with COVID, and then just the way we chose to parent Jaden, which we are happy with, but that meant I had to like leave my career, right? And I think I've always felt this like stuckness with my career, because every time I felt like I was advancing, we would move because of Matt, right? Like whether it was moving to San Antonio so I could be closer to Matt, then moving to Houston for residency, and then now Dallas. At the last year of each of these is when I have this great opportunity that I can't say yes to, right? Because we're moving on. And that's been really hard for me, and ultimately sometimes a innate feeling of resentment, and sometimes even like pushing Matt to be like, oh, you should do this or you should do that because you have the career that you can advance in, or things like that. But I think even with just acknowledging, like for Matt, he has other values that are really important to him and that are great, like within family and within marriage and within parenting, that is something he would sacrifice, not in the sense of like not be able to provide for our family, since we did invest monetarily as well, but in other ways of just like knowing what else is important to him. And so not that I wouldn't push him and continue to like encourage him to be the best at what he does, but I also shouldn't like project my desires onto his desires. Yeah, so that was helpful for me.
It probably is like a core reason why it's hard for us to see each other's side like quickly in those things, because I'm like, I guess I don't feel as like lucky as I should that I've had every opportunity to like pursue this line of work. I think because from your vantage point, it's like, well, you've done everything so you can succeed. And like, I probably take that for granted because I'm like, like, it's great. Like, but I don't see it as this like amazing opportunity I've had. And then vice versa. Yeah,
I guess when I quit, I wanted you to be like, oh my gosh, like you're making this big sacrifice. But you would want to be a stay-at-home dad someday if you could, like, so it's just like interesting, that perspective, like you're saying.
Yeah, it was just good to, put on paper and kind of dig through together.
And we had a lot of very similar values. So that was also helpful to just remind ourselves, like we do have things that
I've always known that we do. It just like plays out in different ways.
Yeah. I guess to wrap it up, even though we talked mainly about this past year, it's not like it was just this year alone that was difficult. What are 3 ways you would have done it different before marriage?
Done what different?
I guess I can go first so you maybe have an idea.
Yeah, you go first. What are some ways?
And then the second question would be, what are 3 ways we've grown because of marriage? But we'll do the first one, and I'll go first, and then I'll ask you naturally. I think one thing that I would do is stay in Dallas while we were dating. And this isn't because like I don't want to be next year or I don't want to choose you, but I think I had moved because you said you were going to propose that year. But unfortunately, you changed your mind, which, is fine. We've forgiven and not forgotten. We've forgiven and moved on. But I think like because when I left Dallas, I was a very healthy person. I was probably in one of the healthiest seasons of my life. And I was leaving Dallas feeling like sent and feeling very purposed in San Antonio to, be your partner and to explore this life together. But once I got there, unfortunately, due to, pauses in our relationship, that led to a very insecure me, a very clingy me, that I don't like those things and I'm not used to being that. Yeah, I guess like we had no strong community in San Antonio. And so a lot of things were like, I began to grow distrust in my own relationship with God, because I was like, I thought I was so confident in the reasons that he was sending me here. And then there's kind of like feeling very rejected. And so I spent those 3 years in San Antonio putting you first, and not in a way that partners should, but like putting you first in the way like I need to earn that right to have him want to marry me again, right? And so that means my actions are now based on earning a person's admiration over what naturally was always God for me. And that led to an incredibly unhealthy me, which led to an incredibly unhealthy us. And for like a long time, not recently, but for a long time, right? That was a huge resentment I felt towards you, was feeling like you didn't realize that hurt it had affected me with. And so in hindsight, right, like I would say to like women and girls, like, don't leave unless you have a finger on your ring. No, ring on your finger. Not like that, right? Like if you feel ready, but I also think like you should make sure you have community. You should make sure you have relationships and other things that are stable in place, not just the guy. And unfortunately, San Antonio had none of that for me. I think in hindsight, I would want to stay in Dallas because I think it would have been a healthier me, which would have led to a healthier us, with hopes that even long distance, we would have gotten together and gotten married. Because I wouldn't choose a different partner. I would still choose you. I just think that would have been a better path for us ultimately. So that's one thing I think I would have changed. Another thing, we started premarital counseling in San Antonio, but unfortunately our pastor at that time, his wife had a pretty stage high cancer, if like out of nowhere. And so he understandably had to stop after like maybe 1 or 2 sessions. And so we kind of just did that book on our own. In hindsight, I wish we either found another marriage counselor, or we took more personality tests, or we took more things that like helped us identify our differences and not necessarily make that not choose each other, but allow each other to understand one another better before a lot of conflict happened. Because I think a lot of things happen because we are wired so differently, and understanding that beforehand is, I think, helpful. Third one, I think asking more questions to you. I think like I just assumed, because you said like you like Korean food, or like, oh yeah, I did that. Like I just assumed certain things, right? But like I think asking what your Asian identity means to you, right, versus what it means to me, like what thing, like the value sheet. Like I just think asking more questions and not assuming things would have been a good thing for both of us, so that we could learn about each other more. Because I think both of us probably assumed we were perfect for each other that first year. And that's what also helped you realize, oh, you're not ready to propose yet because we're kind of different and you are a little worried.
Yeah.
What about you?
In a weird way, I think I would have deprioritized you a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I was so like, I think enamored with you, and the idea that I put so much time and energy into you, and it made me, that part wasn't bad. Like, right. I think we had a really good relationship that year, but I wish I could have stayed more invested in like my current friends. Yeah. Maybe instead of a trip to Dallas, right, I make a trip to Houston or something like that. But as much as that, to expand on that a little, I feel like I don't know, I missed opportunities for kind of continued closeness with the people that I was closest to, and that became, really my best friends through the previous years.
I actually echo that same sentiment. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah. So I would have prioritized that differently, still prioritizing you like right in like an emotional sense and like a effortful sense, but not a time, like less time, less trips and stuff like that. But I wish I would have invested a little more in early med school relationships, and even more than relationships, getting really plugged into a church there. Yeah. Because there was a church that a lot of the med school people who I really valued, they got plugged in quickly. A really healthy church, which I didn't end up finding in San Antonio. But if I would have done that early, right, it was a lot of similar stage, like-minded people who I know I get along with, but I didn't have the opportunity to, because I was figuring out ways I could, surprise you or
that's true, which were really cute.
Yeah, which was good, but it made me neglect things that would have been really healthy for me during those 4 years.
Because then if I did move there, you would have had an established community for us too. Yeah. But not in just hindsight for that, but yeah, I think you definitely prioritized me a lot that year.
So I would have deprioritized you some, which
sounds rude, way,
but actually, I agree. Helped our relationship in the long term. Right. That's by far the biggest thing, actually. Besides that, I think that's kind of like an all-encompassing answer. So that kind of covers, I think, the main question.
No, that makes sense, because even for me, I also valued you so highly when I moved there that I lost contact with like my best friends, and there was a season where I resented you for that even, and that's not fair, right? And that's something I'm going through in therapy, is just like missing friendships. That's good to know if anyone is taking these advice or just reflections of what we might have done differently. I would still choose you. I would just, yeah, like you said, there are other ways to approach it as well. 3 ways we've grown because of marriage.
I've grown in, I think, selflessness. I really like prioritize a lot of non-me things. Like for me to like see success in what I'm doing, it revolves around like you and Jaden and God, like my relationship with God. I don't know. It's made me a really like truly a more selfless person, even though sometimes I need to like, I think, diversify my energy a little bit, like be selfless towards maybe other extended people more. But in terms of like living for myself, like that's really a lot less. Like I kind of know what keeps me healthy and in a good place. But outside of that, yeah, I think they're just things that I realize go beyond me. And I think that's, I mean, overall in a good way. Like there's a balance I need to find, but overall that's been a good thing. I think I've become more responsible. I think I kind of know what I need to take ownership of and like do those things well. Kind of similar to my last answer, that I think I need to expand that more into like kind of smaller like daily things that could be better like supportive of like the little things, kind of easing your mental burden and all that. But for large things, like I think I have developed like a sense of like responsibility and ownership of big things. And let's see, one more thing. I know I'm a really good dad. I guess that's new.
Is it because of marriage? I guess because we made Jaden.
No, I think, let me reword that. I think the
whole world knows you're a good dad.
I think I've learned to be a better like life partner than I had been. So I think that like spills over into fatherhood, because I see that very much as like a joint thing. And but I think it's taught me how to like live jointly and do that in a way that's like biblical, godly. I don't know, like do in a way that is different than in like a dating relationship or stuff like that.
Yeah, no, those are good.
How about you? I'm curious to hear how you've grown as well.
Last week we streamed a sermon. It just talks about like marriage is allowing you to become the privilege of the best you were meant to be. And it's a true transformation for God to develop you. You know, as I was listening to some of the sermon, and there was a part where it said our salvation is wrapped around marriage, and how we respond and love one another reflects our faith and salvation the most. We kind of like talked about it after, and you're like, wow, I feel like I've been doing these things, you know, and in a way that I was like, yeah, you actually have been. You've been responding to me, as we talked about earlier. You've been responding so kindly when I still have my outbursts. And I think like when I have those outbursts, I'm so critical of myself, and I get so mad at myself, and I'm like, see, you did it again. You are messing up this marriage, or because you had this reaction, you know, like it's your fault, or like, why are you like this? Why aren't you the way you were? Things like that are my thought. And not saying like, oh, God made me weak so he could transform Matt, right? But like, I think seeing bigger picture is like trying to accept like in this weakness that I had, like God used it in such a good way to transform you in a way that's clearly so seeable right now, you know? And while I don't hope to always be like that, I think just being able to see like how God is using my weakness is a big thing that has changed lately, because when I see weaknesses, I don't like it, right? And I always want to be growing in a healthy direction, but I've been so angry that I feel like I haven't been doing that. But God's reminding me, like, even in those unhealthy seasons, like that's a chance for your husband to become the best him. And clearly this has been happening.
I mean, I also want to like make sure to emphasize like how amazing like you've approached difficult circumstances, right? I think it's like we have less control about kind of the season we're in, right? Like, you know, the twists and turns of life have led to some struggles, but like I think like the response we have, right, like a willingness to just kind of do what we can to combat that, like that's the hard part, right? The hard part's not sinking into it, and that takes like a level of strength that, I mean, I don't know if I would. I don't know, like I haven't really had these same struggles that you're having. So
That's true. You haven't entered your sickness phase. Uh-oh.
But really, like, I think no matter whatever, like it's easy to see the negative in it, but there's a level of strength there that's like pretty like shocking that like, who knows? Like, I don't know if I'm that strong of a person. And I think that's right. Like, you should be very proud of that. I think it's kind of like the flip side of seeing your weaknesses is when you fight against those, you see like a level of strength that is pretty uncommon.
Yeah. Okay. I received that. Another way I've grown is actually in the ways I've challenged myself. So as a Enneagram type 2, I'm a huge befriender, right? And I want such authentic relationships. Unfortunately, like I adopted a lot of your friends as like my friend group, but it wasn't always the most genuine or natural for me just because of like, not like serious, but still dating histories that don't make it fully comfortable, right? And so I think that was always something that was like for me. But I think like, you know, when I talked about the marriage book club, that's like a lot of your friends where I chose to be vulnerable and like fully me in those small settings. And I just came back from one of my first girl trips as an adult they're actually my friends too. I shouldn't say they're your friends. I do that a lot and that's not correct because I'm actually closer to a lot of them too today. But like I just came back from a girls trip where I was like, wow, I never thought I would go on a girls trip. And not because like I don't like these people, but because I just thought it would be an uncomfortable situation to always be around people that like might know me differently or could have different, not judgments, but like thoughts. I'm like, I made good friendships this weekend too. And I'm proud of myself for going into what is, at least for me, initially an uncomfortable relationship and really still making it a genuine one that I'm sad to say goodbye to as we move as well. So I'm proud of myself for that. I think you have a lot of random friends here and there. And I do feel like I've made those efforts to get close to them. And I think that's a reminder, like even in our vows, I said like your people are my people. And so I do think I've grown in that way. Even if sometimes I remind you that I've done that, it's still something I'm proud of. And then lastly, I don't know, I guess sometimes I am too hard of myself in our marriage, but I think about you a lot and how to try to take care of you. So yeah, that I would say though, like I need to do better at not doing that, not to like not take care of you, but also like to take care of myself, knowing that that's taking care of us. So I guess that's something I'm working on to grow in. So we talked about 2021 and we talked a lot about how 2022 is shaping for us. What does the end of 2022 look like? The next 6 months for us?
Well, I'll be finishing residency
and
we will be moving to Dallas.
MFFL. Say it with me. MFFL.
I'm actually really excited for it. I think even just actually this last hour talking, I mean, one thing that's just a fact that's true that I think is important to recognize is you've made a lot more external sacrifices than I have. Like, as it relates to like relationships. Like you said, like you had to adopt a whole new friend group that was kind of weird, and you did.
I love all of you guys listening.
No, like who knows? Like you're probably better at that than I am. Like I don't know if the roles were reversed, if I would have done that as well as you did. That's very challenging. So like I'm very excited to go to Dallas. That is just a little more of a natural home for you, and like my opportunity to extend myself a little bit to like make relationships with people you know. And I think I'm more motivated, I think, now to do it than I ever have been. And I'm excited to be in Dallas. We actually are closing on a home.
Fingers crossed, prayers lifted.
Yeah, so yeah, really kind of making this a permanent thing and setting down roots in a place that I do hope just feels a little more natural for NG to be. And, you know, my turn to make that feel natural for me too. And becoming really a Dallasite. What do y'all call it? Not Houstonian, but
I think it's Dallasite, but I don't think we say it.
Oh, that didn't sound right at all.
Yeah.
But a Dallas person.
Dallas too proper for the I don't know.
Yeah. So that's a big thing.
Bought a home, moving cities. You're starting a new job,
which will be
full-time crazy job.
Which will be pretty remote. So I'm excited for the flexibility
Which
like, live
aligns
where
with the
we want
career
and
values
to-
of like balance too.
Yeah, and to be there when we have the other big part of our upcoming,
Which
our
is
second child. You
oh
know,
my god.
God willing, that
Yeah.
the pregnancy continues to be healthy and good, and we have a healthy kiddo, another healthy kiddo coming.
That's a lot of transitions
that
in the
is the
next
other
6
big
months.
thing. Yeah,
That's
it's
a
gonna-
lot of big things.
It's gonna be crazy. I'm
And
a little
within, we're
nervous.
raising a toddler, probably doing potty training, moving, all the
Yeah,
crap.
it's nerve wracking. It's gonna be a lot, but yeah, a lot of exciting things to come.
Yeah, and I think a year ago thinking about this would make me so anxious because I was worried about our teamwork or our communication. But I'm really glad that we've been just able to navigate little things as we reach these big transitions, because I have a lot of confidence in our ability to trust in each other as we make really big moves. Any other key takeaways before we kind of close up this pod?
I don't think so. That actually was my final takeaway that was percolating in my mind. Just like I'm excited. Right. All this is set on a foundation of constant transition we've had in our life.
Mm-hmm.
And most of that transition was harder for you than it was for me. So I actually am very
But
excited.
then I made it hard for you because
Yes, but it's the cycle. But I am excited to transition to a place that, at least to some degree, just feels like home for you. And that makes a small part of it at least a little bit easier, and making that home for me too. I think that's a good final takeaway.
Last question. If our marriage was a fruit, what would it be?
Why don't you go first?
I think I would choose a pomegranate because, when you see that finished product, the palms in the HEB line, it's like, looks so great and you just eat it. Yeah, some people want to spit out the seeds. Some people eat the seeds. Jaden and I eat the seeds. I think you do too. But there's so much work. Like if you want that type of pomegranate seeds, like you got to peel it. It's messy. It takes hours. There's different methods. And if you peel it a little bit too much, then all the juice will squirt. And it's not as easy as it seems. And so I think that would describe ours, because right now I feel like our marriage is delicious as a pomegranate. What about you?
Mine would be a pineapple.
Oh, pineapple pizza.
No, just a pineapple. You like pineapples?
Yeah.
Because the pineapple's really harsh on the outside, and you have to. Right, the inside is really delicious, but it takes a lot of work to get there, and it can be painful and sharp. There's a lot of harsh points to it. It's also yellow and white.
Because we're
As we
yellow
are.
and white.
And
Wow, your
there's a
personal
lot of
touch.
sweetness on the inside.
Sometimes it's bitter.
Sometimes bitter,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of it's really sweet,
Mm.
and it's worth it. It's delicious.
Well, let's eat pomegranates and pineapples on our anniversary.
I would love to. Love those fruits.
Sounds good. Okay, got my final random questions for Matt. These are rapid fire questions. Answer them as fast as you can. Okay?
Okay.
Ready? Who is going to win the Western Conference Finals?
I want the Warriors, but
That's your answer. Who's going to win?
who I think is going to win?
Yeah, just who's going to win?
The Suns.
Who's going to win the Eastern Conference Finals?
The Bucks.
NBA championships.
Suns.
Oh, you heard it here, folks.
But that's not a very...
Stephen A. making a prediction.
That's a pretty
It's pretty
common,
generic, yeah.
prediction.
Favorite bachelor of all time?
Bachelor. It's guy. Matt James.
Favorite bachelorette of all time?
Oh, what's her name? Michelle.
Oh, Hannah Brown, you have been...
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's just because that was so long ago.
I guess season might still be Hannah Brown's, but Michelle Young.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, we've only seen three of each.
Yeah.
Who would you have matched with in the pods
Of this last season,
of Love is Blind?
I think maybe what's her face? The Hispanic girl.
Mallory?
Yeah, Mallory.
Oh, okay. Why?
I like Natalie, but I don't know if our personalities would jive. She's a little too subdued, I think.
You like a little fire?
Just a little bit more fun conversation. I don't think Natalie's conversation was ever fun.
That's true. Okay, I can see that. You wouldn't pick Shayna. She's a Christian.
No, she's terrible.
Do you think we would have matched in the pods?
I do, actually. I think you're pretty fun. I think like in a just conversation, and we have shared interests, which in a thing like that is big. I actually think we
I could have name dropped Stephen A.
I think we easily would have, to be honest, I think we easily would have matched.
How many kids do you want?
2.
What do you want to name our next child?
I don't know. It depends if it's a boy or girl.
Okay. If it's a boy, what do you want to name our next child?
I don't have a rapid fire answer.
When were you in the best shape of your life?
Ooh, I'm close to it right now.
I knew you were gonna say right now.
But I don't know. I might not be in better shape than I was kind of in some of my Austin years, like 2013-ish maybe.
What's your favorite thing about your body?
I think these are weird questions. I don't feel comfortable with this. I don't pass. I have a cool bicep vein.
Your bicep vein. What do you want for your birthday?
Furniture.
For a new home.
Yeah.
We have a beautiful new home, but we're not going to have any furniture for quite a while. Who are you most excited for in Dallas?
Oh. Okay, I'll be honest. The first name... Oh, this is weird because I have listeners. Well, people are offended.
Oh, I thought it would be Christine.
So the first name that popped in my head was actually James.
Okay, I thought it would be between James or Christine.
Because I associate him strongly with like that area, like Dallas.
Yeah.
But... No offense, James. I'll probably say Christine and Derek just because, they're like 2 like really close friends. And James is a really close friend too.
Yeah.
I don't like ranking this.
Yeah.
But James was the first name that popped in my head.
Next vacation you want to plan?
Well, it's a 2-part. I want to plan Korea, Japan.
Good answer.
I know that's our next plan. But I can't say it's the most excited one to plan. I would be most excited to plan a Euro trip.
Favorite thing about us?
Well, I don't know if it's us, but you're still, I think, the funnest person I know. I just think, right, when things struggle, it gets in the way and it doesn't come out. But I think my favorite part is you're the most fun person I know to spend time with. And you're my wife at the same time, so I'm very lucky.
Well, wow. This was a really fun podcast episode with you, Matt.
Who's your favorite all-time, if you could date
you didn't come prepared with your own
contestant or bachelor, who would you choose to
date?
To go on to date?
That's hard.
I just thought of it because when you asked who do you connect with the pod, at first I thought in the Bachelorette franchise, who would I, or Bachelorette franchise.
Oh, do you have someone like that?
Susie came to my mind.
Oh, she seems fun, but very rational, like you. Yeah. Like, oh yeah, I know how to control my emotions. Oh my gosh, that's so true.
Who would yours be?
Clayton? Just kidding. Ew. No offense. I would say Matt James. He seems to live a fun life. Awesome. He seems to bring out the best in Rachel.
Rachel will probably be my number 2.
Yeah, I would say Rachel seems like a good partner as well. Yeah, and they do have a shared faith. Yeah. He is culturally aware and fit, etc.
We should do an impromptu bachelor podcast another time. Seems like we still have good content to share.
Yes. Well, guys, thank you for listening to our reflections as we celebrate our anniversary. Unfortunately, Matt will be celebrating our special day at Chang's bachelor party.
Yeah, I'm excited.
I hope you enjoyed just listening to our reflections as we were honest and vulnerable and really just grateful for the ways that we've been able to reshift a lot of things. Hope someday you guys can also share the toughest things, the greatest things about your own relationships, whether that be in your friends, your families, or your other spouse, partner, significant other as well. Thanks for tuning in to Koller Commentary. I'm Unji.
I'm Matt.
And see you next time. If you love this episode as much as I did, head on over and rate and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I would love to hear more from you on topics you want to hear. So go to Koller Commentary to comment your key takeaways and join the email list to share what you want to hear about next. This is Unji Koller signing off for now. See you next time.